I'm JASNEET Pritam. I'm here, a student at the University of Calgary in my final year, and I'm an international student from Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. I'm pursuing visual studies. I'm an honors student and architecture too at the same time. And yeah, that's pretty much majority of my interest is like art and architecture, and it's just like a back and forth between the two for me. This is my favorite piece. It's like tiles, and then I grouted them on the 3D print. I just really like how colorful it is, but at the same time, it's like a weird toy, which I really want all of them to be. Like when you pick it up, it's just like, what is this? Is it cake? Grew up in a very creative household. If I talk about my dad, he can make anything. He's that kind of person, and that's the energy I grew up with. Was like if you want something, he will make it instead of going out and buying it. My mom too, she's very good with the crafts. My sisters are all really good at like the artsy stuff. So I grew up with a lot of art. Initially that was just, I'd say, kind of like pressure. I didn't like it, and I would be like, I don't want to do art, or more so like I would just do it because I have to do it. That was primary school for me. It was just like getting through the whole art, and like every time there would be an art exam, just like getting through that pressure of like you have to do well and you need to prepare in advance. And my sister would sit with me and draw these sketches out for me, and I would have to like learn how to do them so that I can get a good grade in art. And that was just the process. And then I think somewhere in secondary, one sketch she drew for my art exam, I didn't really like it as much, and I was just like, maybe I can do better. And then I think that's when I took over and actually started to enjoy art for what it was. It's just also, I guess, a part of growing up and getting over that. Ever since then, I was always like throughout high school, the girl who does art, that was my identity. For all the events and all the posters and all the banners and just the painting. The way I would be involved in a sports day, which is me hinting to I'm not a sportsy person, was me making the banners for sports day, not the sports. I'd say right now it's mostly sculpture. But I remember like first year with all the experimentation, I tried painting, and I do enjoy painting. I just don't find myself gravitating towards it as much as I do sculpture. I even tried printmaking, and I also enjoyed printmaking. That's the thing, like I feel like any artistic medium I do, I really enjoy. The whole of last year I was doing the architecture part of my degree, which I think is what situated me within sculpture. And within that, I think, like, I know sculpture is a pretty wide term. I'd say mostly installation work. I'm really interested in interactive art. I think that's grown to become very important to my artwork, is that interaction. So in any way, like just something that people can almost exist with the sculpture, and whether it's touching it, it's very like sensory. The plinth has become really important to me. This is something I figured out in my last exhibition, was if I put it on just like a normal plinth that doesn't have this, I call it a sandbox. The last exhibit actually had actual sand in it because it's so playful. It's like, it's the ultimate like toy is the sandbox, right? I wanted to keep that theme or that motif going. I felt like the sand would have been a bit too much in this. But I know that adults really enjoyed playing with the sand when it was there, which is like really cool to know that we're not so above ourselves that we wouldn't play in sand anymore. Material wise, again, like there's no limit. Anything that I could work with, I would love to work with. I'm familiar with wood. I'm familiar with basic crafts materials that I learned how to use in architecture school, with your foam boards and your chipboards. Love 3D printing. which I guess just comes with the whole workflow of doing something digitally. 3D printing is the easiest way to sort of see it and then work on it, which also I think has become a really big part of how I work, is to 3D print things before I actually start to build them in other materials. The actual technique of doing it is what inspires me most of the time, rather than my environment. This is what I mean by they all start super small and then they become something else. So this skeleton is essentially this. This is what it started as. Yeah, and then I sort of started to digitally, like, it is this piece, and then I started to break it down to make it a puzzle. A lot of the skills that I learned in architecture school came in like handy over here. Was how do I section this up? How do I make it challenging? And then I started to, once I had the skeleton, I started to build these sort of pieces that each of them have their own space, and like if they find their space, they would become this, like this whole thing would become this thing. It's funny because even I don't remember where some of these pieces go. Like, I have been playing with it, trying to figure out, oh my god, I did this and I don't even know where they go. Which I think I'm glad, because then it makes it that you can't just finish playing, you'll just keep playing. If you want, you can spend an hour, you can spend 10 minutes, you can spend a day here trying to figure this out. It's almost like what your tolerance is to play. Building something that hasn't existed before, and then I look at it, and sometimes like I 3D print it, and then I look at it and I'm like, huh, this is weird. And then that's where I try to find how that weird technical form that I've come up with, how would that fit in with things that are concerning me at the moment, or things that I'm thinking about. Right now it was just like existential dread, like just the sum of everything happening at the same time, and that feeling of ugh. So how do I take that feeling and take this weird form, and how do I combine them? And like you can see here, I try to create like, and I'm hoping this list just gets longer and longer. It has like mustard seeds and all the random things I've used in the process of making it, which is what I mean by I'm very materially motivated. I don't mind making it with anything. I think, yes, multiple times. Oh my god. I even made a whole piece about creative block. It was called Creative Block. And it was like this weird sound sculpture that you have to wear, and it was made out of actual blocks. Again, like that whole like idea of interaction and playfulness, I guess it's been there since very early on. I just realized it now. How do I deal with creative block? It's a really good question. I feel like whenever I'm in the moment and I'm experiencing it, I don't know how to deal with it. I'm just like being within school, like art school, it's easier to get over creative block because you have someone that's always there to guide you, or you can have a conversation with. Critiques really help with the creative block, I feel. I'd say more often than not, that's what gets me out of that sort of funk. But yeah, otherwise it's just taking a break and taking some time off of what I was doing and focusing on something else and then coming back to it. So the reason interaction is so important in my work is because I'd say this is like a COVID consequence, is like that isolation and like being so far away from everything. And that's where like I think my artwork is just like a response to that. It's very light. So right now I'm working with themes of playfulness. I actually have been for a year now. How kids just play, that sort of innocent and that emotion, how can that exist for us? Even if I'm thinking of other things, like I recently did a project on fulkari, which is like a traditional embroidery, like a craft within Punjabi culture. Even as I was navigating that and like what that meant to me, and at the end of the day my artwork became about play, and how does play incorporate with fulkari, and how can that exist within the world, and how can people interact with this. because I feel like when you interact with it, there's a higher chance that that moment stays with you. See, I love the idea of keeping a sketchbook. I really do. Like, I love looking at other people's sketchbooks, but I found like I've never been able to do it religiously. I have a sketchbook, but like I'll do it once and then I'll forget about it, and then my sketchbook just turns into this long list of to-do lists. Like it's not, I'm not even sketching anymore, I'm just writing. It's like trying to check things off. Like I actually have like obviously multiple files of things you're working on, but then I just have this random file where I just dump things. It's like a very big, clunky, junky file that slows my computer down. But I'd say that's my sketchbook, if that's the right term. What am I working on right now? I'd say, and this is part of like my honors and my thesis, building on this really big obsession and interest with play. I've been working on building puzzles, like 3-dimensional puzzles. Again, I love puzzles. I've always loved puzzles since I was a kid. Trying to navigate how can a puzzle be an artwork, to how can it be. I know puzzles are playful as they are, but then how can I take it a step further to make it more challenging and also playful for adults? I think I remembered where one piece went. Somewhere here. Where's the piece? Here. This guy. Oh. If it stays like that. So there's something that goes here. Like a really thin piece. But, see? One of them's complete. Once I have like this puzzle that I want to build, how do I start to fabricate it? What materials do I want to use? Do the materials become a part of it? Which for my recent work, materials did become a big part of it, because I started to play off of this theory that's called associationism, which is where your first perception influences and creates memories and thoughts. In that sense, I started to experiment with like all sorts of random materials, like from sandpaper to microfiber to fuzzy materials, having something new that people can touch and maybe possibly, like again, everyone's experiences are so subjective, and I want my work to be interactive, so it's inherently about the viewer. Embed as much materiality in my work as I can so that people can find something to associate with, even if it's just one small thing. One of the things I'm learning how to do now is like mold making with like silicone and alginate and all that sort of stuff, so I can start to rely less on the 3D print and more on like organic materials, which has been frustrating to learn but also very satisfying at the end. So it's a good process. Yeah, I'm super excited because I want to build more molds and like put weird stuff in them. That would, yeah, essentially trigger that associationism. Through like conversations, I found that like things that I find that remind me of like this emotion of existential dread, like whether that's like really rough concrete, where I speak to someone else, they see that same piece and they're like, oh my god, I love this is my happy place. And then just that sort of push and pull, and like how those two things can exist at the same time. Can one material look like something that it's not, which is where like the whole title came in. It gets people curious, which is really important to me, was to make something that gets people curious so that you can actually approach it and try to figure out what it is and then figure out the puzzle as a consequence. I know I have one of these materials that looks like a rock, but when you pick it, it's really light, so it doesn't have the weight of a rock, which makes people like instantly either feel uncomfortable or like start to think, oh my god, is there other things in here that can do that? And then instantly now you're thinking about the materials around you and you're like conscious of like the artwork. I like the scale that it's at right now, but I think that if it was bigger, it would have this whole other level of like sensory experience and interaction. Yeah. And then like another thing, I guess this is more the architectural side of it. I was hoping that if this does become something bigger, just this idea of how kids have always a dedicated spot to play in wherever you go, whether it's a playground, it's a building, it's always like this designated kids area where they can just go and do their thing. Like, what would that look like for adults? This could become that, so it's like almost like a speculative design for that, which also excites me a lot. I think another layer to this artwork and what I've been trying to figure out has been, how does an interactive artwork sit in a gallery space? I was really skeptical about that, which is why I'm having this test exhibition right now, is like, would people actually even want to touch it if it's sitting on a white plinth? It has this like really ambient lighting on it, because I really like that idea of doing something nicely and elegantly so that when you look at it, you feel like it's art. But then also I don't like the idea of doing exactly the opposite of what it was intended to do, of isolating people. And I've seen like lots of artists where the plinth becomes a part of the artwork and it's not just a plinth. I'm really super intrigued by that idea. I feel like if I was to develop this further, I want to like paint this plinth a really like crazy color so that it becomes an artwork and it's not just something it's sitting on. But what I like about it being in the gallery is it has its moment. Whereas with public art, sometimes I feel like you can just walk past it. I'd say I've had a positive experience so far, because like every single time I go and see the exhibition now, it looks different, which means that someone has played with it and someone has interacted with it. So I come every morning and reset it so I can see what happens to it essentially. One of the things I was struggling with was I have all these puzzle pieces. How do I again exhibit them in a gallery so that they can each have their moment? And initially I was going to do plinths with them, and then I was like, I don't want them to be too precious that you don't want to touch it. Yeah, I really like that. Ended up with the shelf idea, because this way, even if things move around and the shelves have different things, you can still visually see a piece before you touch it.